So my initial feeling at that moment was, okay, tell me what I need to do to get through it and get cured. I'll do whatever I have to do. Little did I know what was ahead of me. They weren't the typical symptoms, as most myeloma patients have, bone pain and other things. So I guess that's a little odd, but something was off in my body. I have two adult children, 30-year-old daughter and a 32-year-old son. I have a wonderful husband who we're going on 34 years together. I love golf. I love to walk. I love to work out, travel, although didn't do too much of that recently, but I hope to get back to do that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Hmm?
So Julie, let's rewind back to around 2020. So around the summertime, this is when the world's shut down. So there's a lot going on in the background. And
Yeah.
on top of everything else, you're starting to feel some symptoms. Can you describe what those were?
Yeah. It was early July of 2020. And I was feeling queasy. I had a lot of food aversions, fatigue. So I thought it was something to do with my stomach. So I went to see my gastroenterologist, and he did an endoscopy and also had me get an MRI. And he ruled everything out on his end, but he did do some blood work. And the blood work came back that I was anemic. So he sent me to a hematologist, and that's where everything started moving along towards getting me diagnosed. They weren't the typical symptoms, as most myeloma patients have, bone pain and other things. So I guess that's a little odd, but something was off in my body. I felt like I had morning sickness, but I knew that wasn't possible. Um, and then really the hematologist took it from there. He had me come back for a couple of visits, kept giving him more labs. And then finally he said I needed to have a bone marrow biopsy. So at that point, I knew something was really wrong. I felt it. And we went in for the results of my husband came with me, and he told me I had multiple myeloma. And I didn't know what that was. I figured it's a blood cancer, but I had never heard of it. So my initial feeling at that moment was, okay, tell me what I need to do to get through it and get cured. I'll do whatever I have to do. Little did I know what was ahead of me. So he generally described what it was. I had lambda-free light chain, and I had 80% plasma cells. He didn't get into too many of the specifics, but he referred me to a top myeloma specialist who happened to be about 30 minutes away from me. And I went to see him. He went into great detail about my disease. He said the most important things, he was writing on a chalkboard, the most important thing is T1416, translocation 1416, and beta 2 globulin, microglobulin of 6.2. And I'm saying, what? He says, you're a high risk disease, which he got into a little bit. So he's really getting into a lot of details with me. He explained that people that have certain cytogenics with the disease may progress quicker from their remissions, have a shorter duration of response, and the disease could be a little more aggressive. He's explained it that way. And all of that continued as it related to how he was going to treat me. I'd say that was when I saw the specialist at Hackensack, one of the top people in the country. I was very lucky. And of course, I did what you're not supposed to do, Google everything, what is high risk, what does it all mean? And all of the terminology that you do read on Google is not good, because they talk about progression-free survival. What is that? terminology that made me feel like, wow, am I going to not make it? Am I only going to have 3 years? What does this all mean?
I'm just curious in that moment, what were the first things that you thought of when you were really, I mean, very few people, you're so young, people are not thinking about the end. And so for you, what was that? What were the thoughts for you? What were you feeling?
I was fearful. I was fearful of what was to come. I needed to understand it. I did a lot of research after that appointment. I went online with the MMRF, the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, the International Myeloma Foundation, Lymphoma Leukemia Society. I was trying to get as much information as I could and learn as much as I could, which was helpful to me. I wanted to kind of have some control in a situation where you don't have control.
But so you talked to the specialist. How did he talk about here's the path forward for you in terms of treatment?
Well, he explained the induction therapy. He recommended KRD, Kyprolis, Revlimid, and dexamethasone, and then I would go to a stem cell transplant. And because I was a high risk, he was going to plan on a tandem transplant, which would happen 3 to 6 months after my initial transplant.
What was the sort of tenor of that conversation? I know it's high risk and he's a specialist, but was it, here are some options, or was it, this is the only way that we've got?
I trusted him. My sense was there's kind of a standard regimen when you're first diagnosed to have induction therapy. And there's probably my impression was there were a couple of drugs you could kind of change up. But he said that regimen would be best for the high risk. And I trusted that. I did incidentally get a lot of opinions. Early on, I did get an opinion as before I decided on going to Hackensack in New York at one of the big hospitals there. They concurred that was a good treatment plan as well.
Can you talk to me more, Julie, about that? You're going to a specialist. I know you end up going with him, but how did you know to get a second opinion? I feel in a lot of conversations I have, there are a lot of people who don't necessarily think of that right away. So was this something that you knew was a possibility? Did someone else encourage it?
It was me. I know myself, and I need to get all of the information. I need to feel comfortable. So a lot of it was just my personality and really wanting that reinforcement to know I'm making the right decisions. And incidentally, during that first year after I was diagnosed, I probably had 4 or 5 myeloma specialists, very well-renowned people that I had Zoom calls with, some in person, where I had, I guess, second, third, fourth opinions whenever I had to change a drug regimen and make decisions. I wanted to get input because there's lots of options with myeloma, and everybody's myeloma is different, and it can be treated in lots of different ways. I think everybody should feel comfortable getting second, third, whatever opinions they feel they need. And if the doctor that they are seeing does not support that, I think that's a problem. I did tell my doctor I was getting these opinions as I was doing it, and he was fine with that. I think everybody has to feel comfortable, whatever they're comfortable with.
Right, right. I do like that you're encouraging a big part of the conversations we have here at the Patient Story is about self-advocacy and just knowing that it is your right, it is your life. So, go for it and ask for a second opinion. It never hurts. So thank you for sharing that. Really quickly, just in terms of the bone marrow biopsy, because we're going to talk about the stem cell transplant, and I'd like to humanize, right? Give some human color to what these procedures are like.
Well, I always took half a Xanax before.
Yeah.
um, and it was quick. The good news is it doesn't take long. So it's uncomfortable for a couple minutes and then it's over. And I personally like the doctor to tell me what they're doing as they're doing it. So I'm prepared. So I guess that's what I will share. It's important. They get a lot of information from that. They need to do that. Yeah, I that would be my advice. And then breathe.
I love that. Breathe and ask for something to help with the anxiety if you
Sure.
don't have it already. I love that message. And then going into Julie, the stem cell transplant. So you got through the induction. Any major side effects that you want to talk about there?
Yes, I actually only had 2 cycles of induction, and one of the reasons was because was getting fevers. Whenever I had the treatments, I would always have a fever the next day, and the first one was like 102, but I would take Tylenol and it went down, and subsequent ones weren't as high a fever. But the doctor was concerned a little bit about that. They weren't sure what it caused it. They think it might have been the kyprolis, but that was a reaction. And I had night sweats with the induction. So that was mostly what I was experiencing. Started my treatment in October, and my last treatment for induction finished in December. And I started preparing for the stem cell transplant at the end of December with testing and so forth. Well, the stem cell transplant, there's a special doctor, the doctor who handles the transplants, and it's a whole process where they need to collect the cells. So in order to stimulate the growth of the stem cells, I was taking Zarzio probably 8 or 10 days in a row, giving myself injections. And then I'm not sure about the time, but maybe a week after that, I had to get a chemo, but not a high dose chemo, CDE it was called. And they told me I would lose some hair in that process. So I actually chose to get a short haircut at that time in order to ease that kind of feeling of losing my hair. Started losing my hair. And then they collected the stem cells, and I guess it was a week or two after that is when I was admitted into the hospital, and they put a line in, and I received the methylene, the high dose chemo, the next day. And I was admitted, I guess about 12 days I was in the hospital.
In terms of the hospitalization, any tips? There's a lot, obviously, and there's a lot of support that's needed. What was the hospitalization like? Any tips for people watching on how to get through all of this?
Well, I made a point to walk the halls, I think almost every day. I don't know how it is at other hospitals, but in Hackensack, they have a completely isolated ward where nobody was allowed in. And maybe that was because of COVID, but it was completely isolated. So I was able to get out of my room and walk the hallways, and that helped. I had some Zoom calls with my family. The days just went. I can't even remember everything I was doing. I didn't feel like doing a whole lot. Watching Netflix shows and so on. Yeah.
Just to pass the time, right, and get through the day. So
Yeah.
you went through, and it was a tandem. So
Well, I didn't. Well, I ended up not having the tandem.
right, because your number started going up. Is that right?
Exactly. So I did not sustain a remission after my stem cell transplant. And my doctor said it happens to only about 10% of patients.
Oh my gosh.
So it was 3 months after my stem cell transplant, I had progression of disease. And I don't know the medical reasons. I didn't respond to them. I don't know if it had to do with the melphalan or whatever it was, but they weren't going to proceed with a tandem since I didn't respond to the first one or didn't sustain the first one. I would say the first year after my diagnosis was really difficult because I didn't sustain remissions, and I understood that was not most people. And I was worried, will I find something that's going to work? I was meditating. I was trying to become more spiritual. This was all during COVID, so I was home. So it was challenging, for sure, emotionally. Yes. Well, everybody was really supportive. My kids were fabulous. I have to say, they were my family, my siblings, my mother, we all live in different cities, were always calling me, seeing how things are going. I gradually started telling more people in my circle of friends about my disease, and I would have Zoom calls with friends who I maybe hadn't talked to in 6 months. I mean, it was there were a lot of positive things with that. I established a relationship with a nurse navigator at the MMRF who was a godsend to me. She was always there for me to talk to if I needed to get another opinion, or her thoughts about medications and whatnot. And yeah. And I also have a myeloma coach, who's fabulous, who initially I spoke to quite a bit during COVID, saying, what could I do to pass the time? you know, um, there's Coursera. I actually took a course on Coursera on how to study, um, how to analyze research studies, figuring that could come in handy for me with, with
Wow.
my diagnosis. So it got very technical, but I did that. One of the things I did.
So yeah, you found things that were able to help you, Julie, and that's what I'm hearing. And so, okay, so at the time the numbers are going up again, and so you go back to talk to the specialist. What do you have to say at that point?
Well, they recommended a standard of care drug regimen, which was daratumumab, Pomalyst, and dexamethasone. Um, and at that point, I went and received a lot of opinions from other myeloma experts. I had some Zoom calls, from some, and one in person, to really see if, is this the route? And that was the route I took. So we started on that regimen, um, which would have been, I guess, June, I'm thinking, at that point. And so I was going to the hospital, I think it was every week at that point. There was another drug that they gave me Revlimid the first week, because I had to get the drug company's approval for the Pomalyst. So for 1 week I had the Revlimid, and then they switched over to Pomalyst in that 3 drug combination.
And how did that go?
Well, I had 2 or 3 cycles of that, and then I started progressing again. So another decision point. Yeah, I mean, I did respond initially, but then it started progressing, and after that, emotionally, I was scared. We find something that's going to work? I went for a consultation. I'm very fortunate, by the way, to live in the tri-state area. I have some top hospitals, that are accessible to me. And I know a lot of people in the country don't have that. So I was very lucky to be able to get in-person appointments with some of these specialists. And I went to Memorial Sloan Kettering and had an opinion there. And the doctor there, she actually was concurring with talking to my doctor at Hackensack, agreeing on what the next thing should be. Talked about adding selinexor to the mix. And or go on a clinical trial.
Julie, how were these two paths presented to you by your doctors in terms of, here are the pros and cons of going this route, here are the pros and cons of going this other route?
Well, they talked to me about I don't remember all the side effects, but they talked to me about the side effects of the selinexor. I asked for their recommendation, really, their options, right? And I think the majority thought a clinical trial would be the best thing for me, the doctors on the team.
Did they describe, I know that we're going to talk about bispecifics, which are this newest area, lots of buzz there. Not a lot of patients and care partners know about it just yet. So in your consideration, you really said, what would you do maybe in my situation? And how did they describe why a bispecific clinical trial would be best for you?
Well, it was the hot new area, a lot of developments, a lot of buzz. I didn't know a lot about it. I didn't understand what immunotherapy was or bispecifics, but um, later it was explained to me, and I trusted my doctors. I think that they thought the clinical trial was the best route. So I have to say I did put trust in them. I can't say there was one thing that they said that made that decision for me, other than feeling like they all felt it was the best thing for me to get onto a clinical trial.
So what I'm hearing is you had multiple experts you were consulting with, and you really deferred to them. You said, hey, you're the ones who specialize in this. Whatever route you think is best for me, I put my faith in you. Is that right?
I mean, Hackensack at that point was trying to find me a clinical trial there, but they didn't have anything open available for me. At that point, one of the doctors on the team told me to go talk to one of the top people at Mount Sinai, who's still my doctor, about clinical trials. So I had a Zoom call with him, and he said, we have a clinical trial for you that you're eligible for, and it's called talquetamab, and he discussed it with me, explained what the bispecifics were, and then I ended up getting onto that trial at Mount Sinai. Well, I think it's so important to take charge and really have control where you can control. You can't control this disease, but you can control how you respond, and you could become knowledgeable and make decisions. And I don't think there's anything wrong with getting second, third, fourth opinions if that's what you feel comfortable with. And doctors are happy to do that. They really are. Every doctor I spoke with gave me different insights. So take control how you can take control of this disease, and that's through how you respond. And seek out all the information through all of the wonderful resources, the nonprofits that we have for myeloma. And there's a lot of people there that want to help. So I'm grateful to that.